So the coronavirus pandemic has been devastating for the health and economy of African citizens, but the health crisis is changing the way leaders engage with their citizens. A report by the African Peer Review Mechanism revealed that Africans generally accepted lockdowns, but 62% of people in 34 countries questioned the legitimacy of the measures. The report shows that some African countries dealt with the pandemic effectively from the very start, compared with many other countries around the world. To speak to us a bit more about the report and many other related issues, we're joined now by Liesl Louw-Vaudran, who's a researcher at the Institute for Security Studies Africa. Liesl, thanks very much for your time and welcome to the AM report. I wanted to start perhaps to touch on perceptions of the African Union as a body of African leaders and get a sense of how, those perceptions have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. For the most part, the AU has been regarded in some sectors as this all-boys fraternity of guys who protect themselves and turn a blind eye to brazen injustices. Do you get a sense that COVID-19 has in any way changed that, especially for African citizens?
Yes, I do think so. Of course, we'll have to see when the pandemic is over and people go to their old way of working, whether this is going to stick. But what we've seen in the last couple of months really is that because the African Union has up to now, as you say, been largely sort of remote and seen as being, an elitist project, now it's been bound to react quickly, to connect with African citizens on digital platforms, for example, and these abuses of governance that you were speaking about, that we wrote about this week was precisely about that, is that there is a sense that the African Union is starting to listen to citizens, especially now during COVID-19, when really many of them are suffering and they don't have any other recourse almost against, in countries where you have really authoritarian citizens that are using lockdown to stifle opposition, actually.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because we're seeing some of those moments play out in countries like Zimbabwe, right? This situation where there's a hard clamp down on dissent, so to speak. Are we still getting a sense that even though the African Union is speaking out a bit more, it's still a dog that's got a bark but really no bite, because many of these issues don't really change even after pronouncements from organizations like the African Union?
It is true, because the African Union really doesn't have any power to implement its decisions. It's not like the European Union where really states have ceded sovereignty to the supranational power, the European Union. So there are many good ideas and resolutions, and every time heads of state get together and they decide on things. For example, there is a charter on democracy, governance and elections, which is supposed to ensure free and fair elections. But then, oftentimes opposition, ordinary citizens, they have no recourse when their own governments abuse their rights. We've seen something, for example, that's really important for many African citizens, and that is access to the internet. Now, there are countries where the minute there's an elections or something goes wrong, the internet is just cut off. And things like that is really something which many, and especially now, consider as a human right, because that's your access to information. And that is one way where the African Union can weigh in and oblige countries, and especially now South Africa is chairing the African Union. President Cyril Ramaphosa has done really a good job in terms of the COVID-19 responses, and he's also chaired some meetings on issues like the other day there was a on the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, on South Sudan, and so I think he's doing well, but the African Union can do much better.
Absolutely. So we also spoke about this report done by the African Peer Review Mechanism, and I want to delve into its findings a bit more. About 62% of people across 34 countries actually questioning the legitimacy of these measures. Should we be surprised by that? I mean, is it different to any other place in the world where people are questioning the legitimacy of some of their measures?
I don't think it's different at all. In fact, in some countries, it's quite high, and there's a high acceptance and a compliance to COVID-19 regulations. You know, when we started with this, many countries, for example, in Europe and people in the US were completely caught by surprise, and this is something that they've never ever experienced. You know, infectious diseases like this. Whereas in many African countries, we've had, you know, we do have malaria. We had the Ebola crisis. So people, and you know, the HIV/AIDS pandemic. So people are aware of implementing measures, I would say, for their health. So there has been. Most countries, people have been largely accepting, but as the pandemic and as time goes by and it progresses, you know, there have been abuses of power and unnecessary ad hoc, even here in South Africa, measures that people are questioning. And as I say, it becomes really dire in authoritarian states or states where you have really bad governance. And this African peer review mechanism report I really thought was excellent, because the APRM is something that we've had, you know, it's existed for the last 15 years or so and hasn't been very useful. And it has come up with, I think, a good assessment of the governance on the continent.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time and for weighing in on this important issue. Certainly appreciate it. That's Liesl Louw-Vaudran, who's a researcher with the Institute for Security Studies in Africa. Thank you very much indeed for your time.